Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Sofa Sports News Football Show, brought to you by the FNX Network. In part one, we're going to reflect on the Republic of Ireland's historic victory in Cardiff and the future of Chris Coleman. In part two, we discuss another disappointing qualification campaign for the Scots and try to make some sense of Gordon Strachan's latest comments. Part three, we assess England's chances in Russia and get the panel's thoughts on the Ballon d'Or nominees. And in part four, we look back at last night's dramatic finale in South America and round up some of the rest of the qualifiers. I'm joined this evening by SofaSportsNews.com's very own Dan DeLuca.
Hello.
Football writer and contributor to 442 ITV Football and The Guardian, Kristan Heneage.
Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, not bad. Thanks, yourself.
Good. And last but not least, sports journalist and broadcaster Andy Wilson. Guys, it's a pleasure having you both on the show for the first time. So I want to start off by saying welcome, and how are you both?
Yeah, not too bad. Harry, you all right?
Yeah, all good. Raring to go. Guys, we're recording via the World Wide Web, so I'd like to apologise to our listeners in advance for any sound issues that may occur. Unfortunately, we can't all be in the same place. But we're going to start off in Cardiff, where a historical win for the Republic of Ireland saw them seal a World Cup playoff spot. Martin O'Neill's side defended brilliantly, and a fine finish from West Brom winger James McLean was enough to send them through and break Welsh hearts. Dan, you were in Cardiff on Tuesday. What was the atmosphere like around the place in the build-up?
Yeah, it was cracking. You know what the Irish travel like, but it had that really big game feel. Cardiff is an amazing city to watch football in, just because of the proximity to the centre, to the train station. They weren't at the Millennium Stadium, or the Principality as it's called now. They had a little bit further to walk, but the atmosphere was absolutely brilliant. Green and white everywhere, Welsh fans mingling. And I didn't see the atmosphere after the game, but I'm sure it would have been a little bit different and a few less people once the Welsh had clambered home with their tails between their legs. But it wasn't the greatest game in the world, was it? But it was a good finish by James McLean, and it's a really disappointing outcome for the Welsh in this campaign. Really, for them to be missing out on a playoff berth, I don't think, with that group seeded in pot one. They'll be very, very disappointed. There's no doubt about that.
Kristan, I mean, Wales were the favourites going into this one. What do you think went wrong?
I think from start to finish, they just played into the Republic of Ireland's hands. Martin O'Neill, from what I can remember of him at Sunderland, looking at them close up, he's not afraid to bunker in with a low block and try and break on the counter-attack. And I think when you've got defenders like Kieran Clark and Shane Duffy who play that at club level, that's a fantastic foundation to build the team upon. And I think if you look at that game, I think the Republic of Ireland realised very quickly it would have been incredibly naive to go to Wales and try and outplay the Welsh. The strength was to try and almost suck the momentum out of the game and frustrate the Welsh as much as possible, because they didn't have Gareth Bale, so they didn't have that long-range option that has been so influential for them in the past. So you could give away, as I would argue, daft free kicks in wide positions and things like that, and not really have to worry too much. And then you look at that goal that comes, it's from a fairly innocuous breakaway that's really well orchestrated and catches them out. And I think that's the key. Ireland just managed the game much better. I think Wales got too caught up in the moment and what it potentially represented.
Okay, interesting. Andy, we've mentioned that James McLean was the man who got the winner, and he's been often in the press for other reasons, but just how influential has he been for the Republic of Ireland during this campaign?
Yeah, he's actually been very good, James McLean. I think it's important to remember, obviously, for this game that the Republic of Ireland were without Jonathan Walters and without Shane Long, who've been, that's where the goals have come from for the majority of the campaign. So to have James McLean chip in with a goal at this crucial stage, obviously, is really good, because you were wondering at points where the goals might have come from in this particular game. But as you say, the one thing that maybe has always been questionable about McLean is his discipline. He can maybe lose the head at times, especially at crucial stages of the game. But his defensive discipline is very good. His energy, getting up and down the pitch, and see him. He's back in his shape again. So he's a very disciplined player in that sense. But to all the time, and he's always looking to get a goal. And he got his reward the other night, and on his right foot, no less as well, which is obviously I'm sure he'll not let the guys in the changing rooms forget that one.
Yeah, I'm sure he won't. Another player who really impressed was David Myler. I thought he was sensational in the middle of the park and put in a real captain's performance. He'll now serve a 1-match suspension after his late yellow card. Dan, how much of a miss will he be going into the playoffs?
I mean, look, if you're missing your captain, it's going to be a miss, especially on the back of a strong performance. You look at the teams they could potentially be up against, though. You'd argue that missing their key central midfielder is going to be a blow, and whoever they put in is going to struggle anyway. I think it just highlights for me, Republic of Ireland are still a long way away from their peak of maybe 10 to 6 years ago, where they had a good core of players. They haven't really replaced the stalwarts, the two Keanes, Richard Dunn at the back. Suddenly you're looking around that starting 11, and it forces them into the type of tactical display they had to put up against Wales, where I think the way they played was an acknowledgement almost that they were the underdogs and are now the weaker side. And the lads just mentioned there, Jonathan Waters and Shane Long, anymore. So, yeah, I think missing David Myler is a blow, because he's playing well. He's the skipper. He's putting a big performance on a big night for them. But I think it really highlights more that Republic of Ireland aren't in a great place as a nation. A lot of the talent seems to have dried up. It's not being replaced, with the exception of like McLean, who's come through in the last 3 or 4 years, and I'd say he's their best player. There's not an awful lot there, and I think they will miss him. But I think they're going to have to. I think hopefully for them, the performance against Wales will be a springboard, and they'll have a new identity that won't be around getting the ball forward as quick as they can and using Robbie Keane's pace, but more around defensive solidarity, building from the back, grinding out results, and they're going to have to change their style a lot, because whoever they get in the playoffs, it's going to be a tough 2-legged affair.
Yep. Kristan, should someone of David Myler's experience have, been a bit more careful in that scenario? Do you think about that in the heat of the moment, or do you just do what you need to do to get your team over the line?
Yeah, I think criticising him is steeped in hindsight, because in that moment you're just trying to do anything to get yourselves into the next round. And I think you look at the teams that didn't make it through and where there was crunch moments. I imagine they're sitting reflecting today on what they should have done. And yeah, it's easy to criticise Myler. I do think at the same time that the notion that there's not talent coming through, I think Ireland's at an interesting point in its trajectory at the minute, whereby you look at Preston North End, you've picked up Daryl Hogg and Sean Maguire from the League of Ireland. I get the feeling maybe there's just a few coming through that could do something in a year or two. Admittedly, that won't impact the playoff that they've got coming up. And the good thing is, if you're looking for positives, he only misses the first leg. So he can come back theoretically and give you some stability for that second leg, depending on how you do in the first one.
Okay. So the Republic of Ireland's potential opponents in the playoffs will be one from either Switzerland, Italy, Croatia, or Denmark, I think I'm right in saying. Andy, who will they be looking to avoid?
Well, there's no easy game there, is there? Especially at this stage, everyone's in the same boat, so they'll all be thinking they can get one over on each other. I think maybe Denmark is probably the team they'll maybe fancy their chances against. So than any of the other teams, but it's not going to be easy. And but they do have players, that can come in and do a job. Like Kristan said, it's only David Myler will only miss the first leg. So you've got Glenn Whelan maybe could come in there and steady the ship a bit. And I think it's worth mentioning, obviously he's been out for a lot of the campaign as well with his long-term injury, and you've had Cyrus Christie come in and do a really good job at fullback there for Ireland as well. So there is players that are there to becomes. So Yeah, but like like I said, there's obviously no easy games in this stage. But if the draw favours them, then they'll definitely fancy their chances.
Yeah. Chris Coleman told the media he's not thinking about his future after his side failed to qualify for the playoffs. But what does the future hold for the Wales boss? Dan, what, can you see him staying? Can you see him having another crack at club management?
I think he'll stay on. I think he'll stay on. I think, and living in Wales as I do now, the last 2 to 4 years, it has blown up in Wales in terms of football. In that it's gone from a place where people would barely even watch it to like the euphoric performances and the position they got themselves in European Championships last year, to suddenly expecting to qualify for the World Cup. Their lofty world ranking, all that sort of stuff. I think they've got carried away as a nation, and there's nothing wrong with that. And now they've fallen short for the first time. I think it's a reminder again of how hard it is to break into the elite group of nations, especially in the World Cup now, where there's only one team per group who qualify. So I think the Welsh FA will show a little bit of perspective. I think Chris Coleman's enjoyed his time at Wales. He feels disappointed. The players seem to like him. And where else is he going to go straight away that he's any better than having another crack with Wales at getting into the European Championships again? I think he'll stay for those reasons. It's been difficult for Wales, really, in the sense that they've still not made a World Cup since 1958. And their first real test, the first big night since 1994, when they narrowly missed out. I think they drew with Romania on the final day of qualifying. This was the first big game where everyone was talking about it for like 3 days. The red shirts piling into Cardiff all day. There was fans without tickets. It's the first night like that in a home ground they've had for a while. Disappointing. They'll be devastated, but I think they have come far enough that they'll show a little bit of perspective. And I expect Chris Coleman to stay on for another 2 years.
Okay, Kristan, what do you think the future holds for Chris Coleman? And is he good enough to return to the Premier League and maybe take one of the bigger jobs?
I looked up his managerial history before this because I was kind of curious myself, because there was just this, empty space after Fulham. I couldn't remember what he'd done, if I'm really honest with you. And he went to Coventry, was sacked from there, went to, I think it was Apwell, Cyprus, something like that, left there because of financial troubles. Personally, when I watch Wales, I don't see anything from him that suggests a Premier League job is his standard.
I agree.
I think he's very fortunate to have players like Gareth Bale, Aaron Ramsey, truly high quality, in Bale's case, world-class footballers at his disposal, and a fairly good core group there, the likes of Ashley Williams, who admittedly wasn't very good the other night against the Republic of Ireland, but has been fairly dependable. Joe Allen's another good name to throw into that mix. I think he's very fortunate to be in a job that seems to fit in well with him. And I think at the same time, you can't overstate the influence that Gary Speed has on this whole process. Laying that foundation, building the blocks that include those young players that have now matured into full seasoned Welsh internationals. I think anyone that brings Coleman in off the back of this, it's a recipe for disaster, because he's not going to be working with a player of, say, Bale's caliber or something like that, because it's not going to be a top 6 club. It's not going to be a top 8 club. It's going to be maybe 10 to 15 in the Premier League, hoping that he can get them a little bit higher, which I think, to be frank, he's not going to do. So if I was him, if I was his agent, I'd be saying, look, let's talk about how much we love this Wales job and how long we want to keep it for.
At best, it's a job swap with Tony Pulis. That is the best he's going to get, as far as I'm concerned, in the Premier League.
Really, I actually
can you see
Pulis higher than
is Welsh. So if the Welsh FA need to appoint someone, that's the sort of place they'd look. Can you imagine Tony Pulis managing Gareth Bale? No, I can't. But that's one of the candidates. That's the best Chris Coleman's going to get. If you look at Ronald Koeman's on the ropes at Everton, can you really see Everton turning to the likes of Chris Coleman? I can't see it, to be honest. The very best it's going to be a West Brom, a Stoke. If Eddie Howe gets the bullet at Bournemouth anytime, maybe a club like that. But it's like it's like the guys have just said there, it's not going to be a top 6 club. And if I'm Chris Coleman, I'm clinging on to that job for dear life rather than offering my resignation.
Yeah. Andy, what do you make of the whole Chris Coleman thing? Can you see him moving on potentially? Do you think Wales is his level, like the guys have said?
Well, I think the guys are right in what they're saying. If we were to go back to the Premier League, you are looking at the bottom half of the table. But I think it's a no-brainer, really. I mean, the Football Association of Wales and the fans, and I think the players are all for him to stay on. So I think if he wants to stay on, I think it just comes down to his own preference, and I think he does want to stay on. So I think it's a fairly straightforward decision. I expect something to be announced very soon, that he will have signed a new 2-year, whatever it may be, but that seems to be the case. He seems comfortable there. He's obviously got his plan, and the players seem to be buying into what he's doing. So I wouldn't expect anything other than him to stay on.
What you boys won't know, because you don't live in Wales, which isn't a bad thing, but when I turn on BBC One, I get BBC One Wales, and Monday night, so the day before the game, on BBC One Wales at 9:00 was an hour-long show called Dare to Dream Chris Coleman. And it was like Chris Coleman's life from growing up in his park and kicking his ball in his car accident. And they've really taken to this guy as a nation, and they see him as some kind of national hero. So it sounds ridiculous, but because they haven't achieved that much, but taking them to the European Championship semi-final is probably the pinnacle of Welsh football history. So he's gonna get another campaign. There's no question in my mind. There's no way he's going to resign. And yeah, I think the announcement will be made very, very soon. And with the European Championship the way it is now, I'd be expecting Wales to qualify. And if he can't get out of that group, then whatever the group may be, he can't finish in the top 3 of a qualifying campaign, then it's all been a myth, and the dream will come to an end. And it will definitely be another campaign. There's no question.
Yeah. Right, that brings us to the end of part 1. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to part 2 of the Sofa Sports News Football Show. We're going to turn our attentions to Scotland. They failed to seal a playoff spot of their own. The Tartan Army needed to take all 3 points in Slovenia to guarantee their place in the next stage, but fell at the final hurdle despite leading the game 1-0. It has to be said, they weren't a million miles away, having missed out on goal difference, but perhaps the biggest talking point was the post-match comments of manager Gordon Strachan. Kristan, I'm going to start with you on this one. What did you make of Gordon Strachan's comments? Are Scotland genetically behind everybody else?
Yeah, massively. That's what they need. They need breeding centres around the country with the biggest women, the biggest men. I mean, look, it's... If he'd said something along the lines of, I thought our size did us a disservice in this game, I could sort of understand. But when his solution is that, it just makes me think it's time to go. I mean, I listened to a very long interview with him and Graham Hunter, and I think he talked a lot of sense about player development, about the fact that he used to sit in his garage and hit a ball against the wall because it would give him about 1,000 touches in 30 minutes or something like that. And things, little nuggets like that make sense. I can't then extrapolate that out and say, well, he should be manager of the national team, because he just makes thoroughly bizarre decisions. I mean, this is someone that opted not to call Matt Ritchie in when I think he's one of the highest performing Scotland players that they've got, and a bit of a creative fulcrum for Newcastle at the same time. So I think there's decisions I can't understand in there. Ollie Burke is another one. His continued selection for the under-21s, when I think he's good enough to be playing for the senior team. I don't know who is the replacement. I know that at the minute it seems like national teams more and more want someone from that country to manage the team, and I understand that desire. I'm just not sure who replaces Strachan, but somebody has to. That I'm sure of.
Yeah. Dan, what did you make of his comments? I know you were infuriated, to put it in a nice way. When you
I've calmed down a lot, but what was it all about? I understand genetics in sport. I get it. If you're a basketball team and you're not 6 foot, you're going to struggle. middle distance runners tend to be from, like, I don't know, Morocco, Ethiopia, whatever it is, marathon runners from Kenya. I get all that. This is football. You have different profiles for different positions. What he said was we're genetically inferior, apart from Spain, where you were the smallest team. Well, Spain do all right, Gordon, in case you hadn't noticed. And in case you hadn't noticed as well, Gordon, you were quite a good player, and you're about 4'6". So let's put that to bed for a minute. He does this a lot in interviews. He had the interview on, it was either Match of the Day or ITV's The Premiership, whatever it was then, where he started asking the interviewer about childbirth because she was a woman. Google that if you've got a second, because I remember it at the time just thinking, wow, where's he going with this? So I think there's a part of being Gordon Strachan in there. But he's been manager of Scotland for 4 years now. If that's what he believes, then pick taller players. All his players, if that's what you think works, develop a strategy around that. Pump balls into the box, like win headers. He's picked the team like Matt Ritchie, like you've just mentioned. He's not picked his best squad. Before I don't know, but then to come out with that drivel, I mean, there's enough people in Scotland to choose from. The league is weak, but it's still stronger than some leagues around the world that have qualified for this tournament, like Iceland.
Yeah,
I mean, look what they're doing. There's no excuse. I think overall the campaign, they've done okay, Scotland. They've narrowly missed out. I thought their performance 2 nights ago was decent, and I watched a fair bit of it flicking over between the other game. I watched more of it actually in the other game because there was more riding on it, and the England game bored me to death. But they've done okay. They very nearly got a playoff spot for themselves, but to come out with that drivel, I mean, what do the players think when they're hearing that? How can you want him to stay on and coach you for the next campaign? You're sitting there, you're looking to your manager to say, you know...
6 foot. You don't mind coaching you if you're 6 foot, but anyone else.
Imagine if you're like coming up through the ranks now and you're like 5'1". Yeah, you're demoralised.
Might as well pack your bags and go home.
When you just miss out, you want to look to the boss and say, "Look, boss, you know we were so close. What do we need to do next time? How can we do this?" And he turns around and says, "Oh, you're all too small. That's it.
Yeah.
Genetically, there's nothing coming through the ranks. We're fucked for the next 20 years. He's done. He's a dead man walking." And
Andy,
yeah, I think I agree with that. Yeah, it's I think. To put it plainly, that the comments they're both stubborn and prehistoric, really, because this notion, obviously, back in the day, and I know when I was playing when I was younger, it was like, you know, the big players get picked first, essentially, the tall players, the bigger players. But it is prehistoric. That doesn't work like that. You know, the guys have mentioned Spain there. Spain have proved that wrong countless times over the last 10 years that small can be beautiful in the way they play, and now their model seems to be the model that many teams are following. But to bring it a bit more closer to home, you look at the likes of they've mentioned Iceland, but even closer to that, Northern Ireland and Wales obviously reaching the semi-finals of the Euros last year, and Northern Ireland obviously getting the playoff place this time round, and so isn't any excuse, and it just sounds like stubborn. And what he should be doing as an international manager is, and the guys have already mentioned again, players that aren't playing, and James Forrest is another one who's been in brilliant form for Celtic. I don't know how he's not being picked, but he should be just picking his best players and then, right, this is my squad, how can I then work that? But he seems to have this idea in his head, and then he wants the players that don't seem to be there, essentially. It's kind of, he's working the system the wrong way around. I don't really, whereas a lot of international managers would go, right, this is my group of players, this is who I've got to work with, what system can I deploy, who can play where, and go from there. So it just seems to be it's a bit stubborn, a bit prehistoric. So I mirror what the other guys are saying. I think it's time to move on and bring somebody in with some fresh ideas.
Yeah, Andy, you mentioned Northern Ireland there. I mean, how fantastic have they done again? They keep impressing everybody with these qualification campaigns. What do you think they can achieve in Russia if they make it?
Oh well, it's exciting to say the least. Yes, in case you haven't already figured out, I'm from Northern Ireland, so so yeah, it's been brilliant fun. I'm sure similar to the way things are in Wales that Dan has described. It's much the same here. We're all very much behind Michael O'Neill and what he's trying to do. It's really much the epitome of a team effort is what you see. You see everyone working for each other on the pitch, and there's a real sort of collective idea there behind the whole squad and the dynamic. So it's really, really, really good to see, because we do have a few obviously top quality. You've got Stephen Davis in there, Premier League football, and you've Johnny Evans, so you've got sort of a good spine there, and he's been able to bring in some sort of hard-working players to fit around that. And we missed Chris Brunt last summer at the Euros. He was a massive miss. So it's good to see him back playing again as well. But it's definitely exciting. So I think Scotland will obviously, as we mentioned, will be looking at teams like ourselves, thinking, why can't we achieve that at the moment? But yeah, exciting times.
Yeah, that's the blueprint for success, I guess. Kristan, I know you mentioned about countries having the desire to bring in managers from their own nation, but do you think it's time Scotland look elsewhere now, because they're consistently failing, and maybe it's time that they go and scour the planet and try and find someone who can do the job? What are your thoughts on that?
The thing is, it didn't really go great for them when they brought Bertie Vogts in, who did kind of fit that brief. I think whenever you're deciding your manager based on their passport, you're probably heading for failure in some form or another. I think, excuse me, what Scotland need realistically now is, and this is arguably applicable to a number of teams that haven't qualified, is they need some form of identity that maximizes their strengths and negates their weaknesses. I mean, you look at someone like Belgium, who qualified, I would say, very easily, have a number of players in the Premier League that are at the top end of things, and yet you wouldn't say their domestic league is one of the strongest in Europe. In fact, Celtic just beat Anderlecht the other weekend in the Champions League. So I'm inclined to think that there's lessons and there's tricks that Scotland are missing when it comes to developing players, and some of that is probably relating to the fact that enough players don't go abroad and try their hand there. You've got the likes of Tony Watt, who went to Belgium, ironically, for a little bit. Ryan Gold, who's in Portugal. I mean, even Burke went to Leipzig for a year, and by all accounts, I mean, he was schooled in England, so it's unfair to blame Scotland, but he was described, I think, as a computer missing software or something along those lines, and someone that was quite tactically naive. I think employing someone like Strachan, who has that respect and has that perceived pedigree, is all well and good, and it's paved with good intention. But ultimately, I think they need someone considerably younger and someone who actually has a plan for the next qualification campaign, perhaps the one even after that, and one that can easily be traced in terms of, this is what we're looking to do, this is how we're going to improve the standard of young players, this is how we're going to incorporate things. When you've got the likes of Ricky Sabrasia saying he doesn't know how Iceland managed to get to the Euros, I think that's quite concerning, because he's in charge of their youth development.
Yeah.
This is the thing with international management, though. If you're managing a second or third rate nation, you are relying so much on the generation before, having brought some players through properly and coached them. I mean, the Scottish, if you go back to like 1990, when Scotland were in the World Cup in Italy in 90, I think like 50% of their players were playing in the top half of the English division. All right, the English division wasn't as strong as it was then. Even in 1998, you had like players at top clubs. You had like John Collins, who was playing abroad. You had Paul Lambert, who had just won a Champions League. You look around, there's none of that anymore. Rangers and Celtic, well, Celtic particularly, but over the last 10 years have been riddled with foreign players from unfashionable countries like, Lithuania, places like this. So there's not a lot of Scottish talent even hitting the top of Scottish football now, never mind English football. In terms of a manager for Scotland, someone young coming through with fresh ideas is all well and good. But I think there is a manager whose stock has fallen dramatically to the point where I think he might consider the job now and see it as a way back in. And if they could get David Moyes, I think it'll be as good as they can get. I can't see David Moyes picking up a job that would whet his appetite in England at the moment. So it could be a good 2 to 4 year stopgap for him while he rebuilds his stock.
Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion. I mean, for me, though, I think with international management, I think, there's two sides to it. You can argue that it's more difficult because you have less time with the players. Your selection pool is smaller because you can only pick players from that country and so on and so forth. But the other side to it is it should be a lot easier to motivate your players to play for their country, I think, anyway. Might be being a bit old-fashioned here, but I think, motivation becomes easier when they're representing their countries. And also, there's so many examples of managers of so-called smaller nations getting things right. I mean, Greece won Euro 2004, for God's sake. But you can't say that they had a good group of players brought through, because the likes of Nikos Dabizas and Zagorakis in the middle and Charisteas up front, these players were laughed out of most of the clubs they went to. So I don't know, it's a difficult one for me. I think international management is a completely different beast to club management. And I think some managers are better suited to it. David Moyes, he wouldn't be a bad appointment, but I can see David wanting to get back into sort of club football because, that's the day-to-day of it all.
Yeah, just picking up on like what you said, Greece obviously didn't have a great team, but I think it just shows very, very clearly that a huge part of international football is that motivation, but moreover, just that passion. Like teams like Iceland is the perfect example. Like, look how they've climbed the world rankings. Look at the way they play. Look at the way the fans support them. That collectiveness is a massive, massive part of international football. And we've already mentioned like Northern Ireland and Wales are doing it as well. So does come in and needs to find a way to sort of for one, obviously correct things on the football pitch, but two, just create this sort of, I don't know, this like atmosphere, this sort of passion and this motivation that everyone can get behind, because it seems to be working. I think it's there may be no science behind it, but it seems to work based on what we've seen with Iceland and some of those other nations. So I think definitely in Scotland's case, they could use something like that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Kristan, you work in the media, and do you think the media has a big impact on sort of the morale around an international team? I mean, Scotland are always getting hammered for failing. I mean, England seem to come under criticism, and we'll move on to England in a bit, but England could cruise through qualifying and still be criticised. Do you think that the media has a big part to play in the way fans perceive it?
Perhaps 20 years ago, I would say, yeah, because I think fans in general were less skeptical of the media. They didn't look at it with an agenda applied to it, or as if, the producer of said media had an agenda, which is not to say that the media does today. I think much like any profession, it's a case-by-case basis. I think players have become better at tuning it out. I think you look at players right through the years. I mean, Alan Shearer just said this week on the True Geordie podcast that he never used to pay any attention to the media, be it Match of the Day, be it newspapers, anything. So I think it's dangerous to generalize what is a very individual and personal thing. Personally, from what I've seen from speaking to players, a lot of them don't care. They don't read it. They've got too many other distractions these days to pick up a newspaper, to read an article. I think if something they feel is particularly egregious comes across their timeline or is sent to them by their agent, yeah, they'll respond to that. But I think they themselves are the greatest regulator in terms of whether they played well or whether they played poorly.
Mm-hmm. All right, that brings us to the end of part 2. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to part 3. We're going to turn our attentions now to England, who qualified for Russia, but nobody seems to be that excited. England only dropped 4 points throughout the qualification group, but the mood around the current squad and the manager just seems to be so negative. I'm going to start with you on this one, Andy. What did you make of England's qualification campaign overall?
Well, they've done the job, pure and simple. I don't think there can be any arguments there. It wasn't always pretty, but they've done the job. it's hard to sort of, well, from me looking, outside, not being an England fan, just looking over and trying to work out what exactly it is. And this is sort of the things that I've picked up is there seems to be, even at this stage, still a lot of experimentation going on with the squad and the system and the formation and things like that. And it looks like at the moment doesn't actually know his best team. I know it's difficult with players, sometimes they're not always available if they're injured or whatnot, but it's still seeing, and I'm sure if you guys watch England more regularly that you can correct me, but just seem that they don't have, they don't know their best team, they don't have a set system, they don't have any particular way of playing, so it just looks a bit all over the place. But in saying that, they have done the job, so there's no question about that. So how well can they do in next summer will remain to be seen. But I think that's over the next maybe 9 months. That's what I think Southgate will have to nail down, something a bit more permanent and something a bit more in place, so that when it does come around to the finals, then that they're in the best position they can be to achieve success.
Yeah, fair enough. Dan, what did you make of England's qualification campaign? Is Southgate the right man in your view?
It was uninspiring, is the word I'd use. I don't support England any more than most of us on this panel, but watching them, it was uninspiring. I think if we're talking about England in terms of trying to win the 2018 World Cup, you look at World Cup winning teams, they have either experience or quality. I don't think this team's got either, and that's the problem. You need at least one of those two in abundance. I think they're in danger of making the same mistakes as Euro 2016, where they're going to have a lot of players going there in the starting 11 who have not actually built up enough caps prior to that tournament. So at the last tournament, the best left back was Danny Rose, but he was going into the tournament with like 5 caps. You had Kane and Vardy, you had like 10 caps apiece. There's a lot of players there. Now you've got Keane playing at the back. He's going to form like the central defensive partnership with Gary Cahill. They're going to have played like 6 or 7 games together. There's not been enough of a succession plan. Euro 2012 for a start, and World Cup 2014 rather, was spoken about how good this young England side was and how they could grow together, and they haven't. It's going to be 80% of a different starting lineup. So I think they've made mistakes over the 4 years in that respect. And it's going to be more of the same from England, I think. It'll be some decent young players in the side. The golden generation is gone. And I know not knowing your best team is a bad thing. Sometimes knowing your best team is a bad thing as well if that team doesn't work, because you end up with the Lampard-Gerrard situation. But in terms of quality, England are miles away from their peak. In terms of experience, they're miles away from their peak. And there are 10 other nations off the top of my head who would absolutely annihilate them in a one-off game. And I don't think they've got any chance. I don't think they've got any chance whatsoever.
Okay. Kristan, what do you make of their chances, and how did you see their qualification campaign? Was it just a case of job done, or is there things to take encouragement from?
That's a good question. Because so often with these kind of things, you don't come to the clearest result until you're able to look back at it from a distance. Because I can think of qualification campaigns that have gone similar to this, and teams that have gone on to win and teams that have gone on to tank. I think you have to say job done. When you see the teams that have have failed to advance, you have to take some positivity when a team does make it. That's the truth of the matter.
Yeah,
I agree with that. It's been a job done, and it's been done easier than France. Scraped, if you like, a win to qualify. Portugal only just got through the European champions. So in terms of what they've done, it's fine. But we will watch every England game. We'll probably watch 50% of the games of other nations. And we know, based on past history, that England haven't progressed enough. So having seen them qualify with ease for the last, since they missed out in 2008, they've qualified with ease every single tournament. and it's not been enough. So this tournament, they'd be just as well scraping through, but actually developing an identity. I don't think over the 10 qualifying games and a few friendlies Southgate has had, he's got any closer to having a clue about what he would like to do in the summer. And that is where my fear is. The qualifying campaign in isolation is fine. They've breezed through. They've been allowed to experiment, and that's a good thing. But I don't know this, but I get the feeling like you boys have as well. He hasn't got close to knowing what he wants to do. He hasn't even. Think about it this way, right? How many games have you been in charge, Harry? He must have been in charge for what, 14 games?
Yeah,
he's only just decided on a captain. You know, that's what state they're in. It might not be a big deal, but he's only just decided on a captain, and we're expecting him to know what his first 11 is. I think he's muddling. I think he's trying so hard to do the perfect job. He's going to end up making it very, very difficult for himself, and it's going to be over before it began.
I mean, you just mentioned the captain situation, and that was going to be my next question. Who should be England captain, and who should be groomed, in a sense, to be ready to take them into the tournament as the captain? Now, my worry is that when I look at that team, there isn't a captain there. Nobody cries out to me and says, I should be the captain. You know, for me, you could say, should it be your best player? Should it be your most experienced player? These are normally the way sort of people look at it. But for me, nobody stands out there. And I mean, I don't know what you guys think. Andy, if you were Gareth Southgate, who would be your England captain, for example?
Well, I think the key to any captaincy is experience. So if you look at that England side, probably, arguably, maybe your two most experienced, well, would be Joe Hart and Gary Cahill, maybe, would be the top that stand out to me. It's obviously very difficult because how much it's like they said with Gareth Southgate. I think he is trying to. I mean, I think his intentions are good. He's trying to obviously get everything right in one go, but like anyone knows, it's not always possible. So, in terms of picking the captain, I think he needs to just like the likes of Gary Cahill or maybe Joe Hart. Someone who's been around, they've played a few tournaments, they know the score, and they can go from there. I think that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah. Kristan, who would be your England captain?
I mean, that's the thing. I think the notion of a single captain seems a bit arbitrary to me, because realistically, you look at the best period of England within our lifetime, there was a number of leaders on the pitch. It wasn't just Paul Ince, it was Tony Adams, it was Alan Shearer, Teddy Sheringham. They were all fairly strong characters and personalities. And I think that's sometimes the issue, is that we isolate one individual as this rousing leader that is supposed to drag everyone through. When, for me, I think the best teams have character and abundance and leaders throughout the pitch who can pick a side up wherever's needed. And I mean, that's the overall issue with the England qualification thing, is we're trying to discern something from these games. And there are negatives, obviously, in terms of the fact the team didn't play that well against Lithuania the other day. But Roy Hodgson, I think, had an unblemished record, didn't he? 10 wins or something like that the last time they went into a tournament. And then they absolutely tanked it. And I think that's been the problem with England for a while, is that it's all well and good to breeze through qualification, but it's the pressure of the tournament that truly decides whether they're going to crumble or not. And I think that's unfortunately, as much as people want cast iron answers and genuine insight, I think we're locked in that sort of vicious cycle of being trapped between a strong qualification campaign and a bad tournament. And this has to be the point at which that cycle is broken. Otherwise, I think it could end up really poorly for them in the long run.
Yeah. Interesting. Guys, I just want to go around the panel quickly, just a quick fire answer. Andy, what should England be looking to achieve? What would be a good World Cup for England?
It's a hard question. Well, look, I think is acceptable. You know, you're talking about the last 8 there. So I think if you're getting to the last 8, I think you can given that this England squad is relatively inexperienced, it bodes very well for the future. It definitely does. But I think the last 8 would be, at the very least, what England should be aiming for.
Yep. Dan, what about yourself? Where do you think England should be finishing? What signifies a good World Cup for England?
A good World Cup would be the semi-finals. That would be a successful World Cup. Last 8 is par. I agree completely. That's what England should be aiming for. And then when they get to that point, see if they've grown into the tournament, see if the draw's favourable, and all the sort of luck and running you need sometimes to win a tournament. But let's put this in context here. Apart from Wembley, England have won 5 knockout games in the history of football.
Wow.
5 knockout games away from Wembley in the history of international football. That is a disgrace. So anyone thinking they're gonna win a World Cup, well, let's get to the quarterfinals, win 1 knockout game first, and then see how you're getting on. It's an unbelievable fact of life that not many people realise.
Yeah,
it is disgraceful from a country who sit on a moral high ground when talking about football. Absolutely disgraceful. So win 1 knockout game, whether it's against Iceland or anyone else. You play big teams, you lose. You play Iceland, you lose. It's just 1 knockout game. That's all I want from England in this World Cup.
Just what?
One knockout victory.
Just the one. Kristan, what about yourself? What do you think? What's a good World Cup for England? Are you going to agree with the other guys? We're going to have a full house for once.
Yeah, I think wins. I don't think. I think convincing wins is the key. I mean, they can play well and still lose, and that doesn't change anything. You look at the 2014 World Cup, you look at the Euros, the performances have just looked meek. You go back even to the Euros before that, when they beat Sweden and things like that. It just wasn't, there was nothing really to inspire there. I think I give them some credit, at least with the Euros that just went, beating Wales 2-1 and things like that. There was like a little flicker of something there, but they destroyed any good karma they got from that by falling to Iceland. And I say that as someone who respects immensely what Iceland have built and the fact that they've actually curated an infrastructure from the turn of the millennium to where it is now. I just think that they almost have to show up. I think there's so many of that squad that can perform at a very high level, can do it in Europe and all these things, but for some reason when you put them on the same pitch together, it doesn't seem to click. And I think whether it's Southgate, whether it's them, the truth is it's never one factor that builds these kind of nasty storms. I think they just have to show up and perform. I wouldn't want to put a line in the sand and say it has to be the quarterfinals, it has to be the semis. I mean, they have to get out of their group realistically, irrespective of who they draw. But thereafter, the sky's the limit for them, really. Yeah.
Okay. This week, we also found out the Ballon d'Or nominations. Among the Premier League players nominated were Felipe Coutinho, Kevin De Bruyne, David De Gea, Eden Hazard, N'Golo Kante, Harry Kane and Sadio Mane. Obviously, the usual suspects were in there: Neymar, Ronaldo, Messi, so on and so forth. And it was nice to see players like Falcao back in there. Isco of Real Madrid was in there, deservedly so. Dries Mertens from Napoli, who's been fantastic. I'm gonna put two sides to this question. So firstly, I'm going to ask you guys, out of the Premier League players nominated, assuming that it was just between them, who would you award the Ballon d'Or to? So the Premier League Ballon d'Or, if you like. Andy, who would you give it to?
Harry Kane. Straight up. I don't think, as much as I have to say, I really do admire Kevin De Bruyne. I absolutely love what he does. But I think Harry Kane has deservedly earned his plaudits over the last couple of years. Even when he was doing well, him. I know obviously he has his traditional August drought and what have you, but still he seems to be scoring for fun, really, isn't he? So I think Harry Kane is Premier League. I think even out of the other ones, if they really want to sort of, because obviously Messi and Ronaldo have their case every year, but to really sort of make a stance and sort of maybe shift the generation down to the next group of guys, you sort of go Harry Kane. I think would be your number one choice there. But yeah, definitely out of the Premier League candidates, I would say Kane.
Okay, Kristan, yourself out of the Premier League candidates, firstly.
Yeah, Kane, I would agree with that. I think he's set new standards for himself, and yeah, even with that August drought, it has to be him.
I'm struggling to hear this as an Arsenal fan, I must say. Dan, what about yourself?
Yeah, sorry.
No, not another one.
It's going to sound like the Spurs bias, but in terms of the Premier League candidates, it's Harry Kane. We're talking about 2017. It's 43 goals in 37 games in a calendar year. I don't think any of the Premier League candidates can stack up with them sort of outputs, irrespective of where they play on the field. I disagree with Andy in that if Messi and Ronaldo are out the equation, I wouldn't put Harry Kane that highly on the remainder of the list at this point. I think, I'd like to see probably Isco coming in third, maybe Luka Modric, who's had an absolutely fantastic season for Real Madrid. But in terms of the shortlist, the only Premier League player perhaps I'm surprised to see on there is Sadio Mane.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
I think the others are warranted over the course of the calendar year. Sadio Mane didn't play a game until February, did he? Because he was at the AFCON. Senegal didn't have a very good African Cup of Nations either, and the back end of the season his form wasn't great. So he's the only one I'm surprised to see on the list.
Okay. Kristan, if you had to award the Ballon d'Or to someone, obviously not just Premier League now, we're talking about the Ballon d'Or itself, who's earned it for you this year? Are we talking Messi, Ronaldo again? Or?
That's a good question. I think, there's part of me would like Falcao to do it just because of the comeback element and the thought that his career was finished, and then he kind of guides Monaco to the French league title. But I think Ronaldo potentially pips it because, again, he's won the Champions League. Again, he's done what I think no other player in the modern era has done, which is win back-to-back Champions Leagues as well. And you would argue has been influential in it. It's one thing to just play in that game and pick up the medal, but it's his goal that gets them back in the game. He was a nuisance throughout the full 90 minutes. And at the same time, I think he's had a great year. And I'm sure it's frustrating to see it go to the same guy every year. But for the maintenance and consistency alone, you have to give him it, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. And I've always been a Messi fan, and I've always rated Messi above Ronaldo. But you have to admit, the gap has closed, if there's even a gap at all anymore. Guys, that brings us to the end of part 3. We'll be back in just a moment with part 4. Welcome back to the 4th and final part of the show. Let's go back to the World Cup qualifiers. Myself and I believe Kristan stayed up all night last night watching Argentina battle it out with Ecuador for their place in the World Cup. It was a Messi hat-trick, a Messi masterclass. He single-handedly dragged Argentina to Russia. Kristan, how good is this guy?
The thing is, a few days prior against Peru, he did everything but score. He created chances. He ran at Peru. He beat 2-3 players. He was sensational. And, that was kind of one of the jokes floating around last night, was that he kind of decided, having done everything but score, then he had to score as well. And he was brilliant from start to finish. And I think it's so easy to just talk about him and his goal-scoring exploits. But I think you've got to give credit to Argentina in general, because after, I think, a minute or two, they're behind. And it would have been so incredibly easy in that climate, with that pressure, to fold massively and concede more and go inside yourself. But they just seem to respond and bounce back. So I think, they've earned their place figuratively and literally in that regard, because it's not an easy place to go to, Ecuador. It's really not. And for them to emerge victorious, I think they deserve immense credit for it. Yeah,
I believe they'd only won in Ecuador once since 1960. So it's a difficult place to go. There's no doubt about that. A side who missed out on qualification for the World Cup were Alexis Sanchez's Chile. I don't know if any of you guys saw David Ospina's hand, literally his hand, in Chile missing out on the World Cup.
It's unbelievable.
Unreal. Guerrero's taken an indirect free kick. It's going in the goal, and Ospina, by touching the ball with his hand, has essentially legalized the goal and handed Peru, the point that they needed. to take that last, the playoff spot. Andy, how much of a blow is that to Chile, and how surprised were you considering they've won the last 2 Copa Americas?
That's incredible.
You're talking about the wrong keeper at the moment, right?
The wrong keeper?
Yeah. You're talking about Espina?
Yeah.
Espina's Colombian.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I meant.
Oh, I know it's past my bedtime, but I'm still on the ball here.
That's what I meant. David Ospina's hand basically gave Peru the point to get them into that last spot and deny Chile. So, I mean, how surprised are you by that, Andy?
Oh yeah, it's quite amazing. Chile have been, as you said, they've been brilliant over the last few years, and they've been great to watch as well. They've been really, really entertaining. It's sort of epitomised by Sanchez sort of bustling about up there, and then everyone else is following suit. I've seen this today as well. Like Vidal has announced his retirement in the aftermath as well, so he's a huge loss for them. Of course, he's been immense in the midfield as well. But it won't be the same without them. They definitely bring a bit of. They're sort of. I think their style of play is quite similar to it's like Brazil of old, but just without so many world class players that Brazil have obviously had. But it's definitely that sort of samba style, and they're obviously brilliant to watch. So yeah, there'll be a huge miss.
Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, now I've caught up. It's obviously Espina's error for Colombia that's given Peru the point that's knocked Chile out. And
that's what I was trying to say.
Espina made 2 absolute howlers for Colombia 3 days ago in a 2-1 defeat. I think it was to Paraguay. So they were 1-0 up with like a minute left, and he handed 2 goals on a plate. So that's 3 in a week, which is a bit worrying if you're an Arsenal fan and Peter Cech gets injured, because he's going backwards. But look, I have not having Chile at the World Cup after the way they played at the last World Cup is a shame, to be honest, because they were one of the more exciting teams. So that's disappointing. But look, I've got a thing with South American qualifying that I don't like. It's 50% of the field qualify, essentially, assuming whoever it is beats New Zealand over 18 games. And if a team miss out, I just struggle to have any sympathy. How easy do you want it to be made? Like, it's 18 games to come out on top. I can't have any sympathy for Chile overall. If Espina has made an error that's cost them a point. Their performance in Brazil in the second half was poor. I've only seen like some extended highlights. But they were in prime position for quite a while. They've won the last 2 Copa Americas. To not finish in the top 5 is a really poor display. And yeah, they deserve to miss out, irrespective of whatever Espina's done in the other game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to keep dwelling on Ospina's error, but I mean, I've seen it back again, and even the Peruvian commentators in the build-up to the free kick must have said 3 or 4 times, this is an indirect free kick, and they were just astounded when the ball ended up in the back of the net, having been touched by Ospina. Kristan, is there a sense of Chile sort of using Ospina's error to hide behind it and maybe mask their own shortcomings?
To a certain degree. I mean, I have a slight note of sympathy for Ospina, because I think in that situation, I imagine your brain just is so rudimentary in terms of, you see a ball coming to the goal, you stop it. You don't think this is an indirect free kick, because I'll be honest, I didn't click that as I was watching it. I just thought, oh, he's poorly saved a free kick here. And I think overall, yeah, Chile haven't been good enough. And I think it was Bravo's wife that took pop shots on Instagram at some of the players about them drinking. And you look at, the professionalism of Arturo Vidal and things like this. It's not been a team that has carried over from the Copa America, because I was in the US for the Copa America Centenario 2 summers ago, and Chile were very good during that tournament. The final wasn't great, but their performances prior to that were very good. And I think that it will be a lesser World Cup without them. But at the same time, I can't for a second justify the fact that this one goal means that they should be allowed in. No, they didn't perform well enough at all during the other games, and could have easily found a way to the tournament.
Yeah, and I guess that had that goal not gone in, they still would have been in the playoffs, so they wouldn't have been definitely on the plane to Russia. Another side who missed out last night, absolutely stunned, were the USA. They were eliminated by, they were beaten by an already eliminated Trinidad and Tobago. That combined with some brilliant results for Honduras and Panama meant Bruce Arena's men missed out. Andy, for a country that is pumping so much money into the development of football, and such a huge nation, how much of a blow is it to miss out on a World Cup?
Yeah, it really is upsetting for them because, as you say, they're trying their best to really promote and enhance football over in the States. So this is a massive blow for them, because they have been ever present in the World Cup. You know, I've said over the last number of tournaments that they've definitely been there. So it's for them now. I don't. What I would be curious to know, and maybe some of the other guys, if you know, Kristan, if you've been in America, what the coaching setup is like there. Do they bring coaches in from the likes of the UK, or do they just have their own coaches there? I'm quite curious as to what the setup is and their grassroots. You know, what are they actually working towards? So that's one of the questions I would ask. But yeah, it's a massive blow for them because they've definitely been. It is on the up there, but yeah, this is what their actual grassroots system is like.
Yeah. I think the problem the US has is it's a financial one, and it's not it's not a lack of money within the Football Association. It's quite the opposite. It's far too expensive to do coaching courses. Geographically, they're located in really poor places, and if you want to play football, it's an incredibly expensive pursuit. Be that with MLS academies or whatever. The term pay to play has become a bit of a stick for critics to beat the US with. And it loses you a lot of the working class talent that might make its way into the national team. We look at England as a good example. There are a number of players who I would imagine couldn't have been able to afford a £1,500, £2,000 a year fee to play youth football if that was the way that it worked in England. And so instantly you lose a significant part of the population. You then factor in the very difficult immigration situation in the US, and I'm not talking Trump and banned nations. I'm talking undocumented children and youngsters who, for fear, I imagine, of being deported and all these things, slip through the cracks and don't play in anything like that, and have very difficult situations to try and navigate before they even try to kick a football. That, for me, is two of the bigger obstacles the US has to overcome between now and 2022 if they even want to stand a chance of getting to the World Cup. Because I think, yes, they have talent already, the likes of Christian Pulisic and DeAndre Allen. They are talents that have come through the system. But I think they haven't come through the system because of it. I think they've come through the system in spite of it. And that's why you need to actually hold it up and say, okay, we're not doing enough for our young players. There's guys like Bobby Wood is a very good example who really only got a decent start in football because there was a coach, his name is George Kuntz, who worked at UCI Irvine, and he was informed by a coach that he knew in Hawaii that there was a very talented young forward, that he then got onto a travel team, who then went to Belgium, who was then scouted. And it's all of those little things. You have to remember, admittedly, the US is a vast nation, a huge continent-sized nation, but it needs more infrastructure. It needs more organization if it's going to do anything notable in the next few years.
Yeah. Dan, what are your thoughts on the USA and their footballing pedigree?
I think it's their first miss since 1986, I believe, to answer that question before. But that's a really intelligent counter argument of looking at what the problems might be. And whilst I take some points in there, I can't entirely buy all of it, in the sense that population for me is kind of been quashed a little bit. I mean, yeah, okay. The cost of coaching in what you were talking about there is probably a thing there which is the most relevant, in the sense that if you're not going to get quality coaches in, you're going to struggle. And that's a fact anywhere. But we're talking about a nation with 250 million inhabitants. And if some get lost along the way, that might prevent them from becoming world beaters or winning a World Cup or getting to the last four of a World Cup. But we're talking about they've lost out on the World Cup because they haven't beaten Trinidad and Tobago. Today, as we sit here, Trinidad and Tobago are the smallest nation in terms of population to ever play in a World Cup. So the population argument, I think, loses a little bit of weight there. Iceland will now beat that. They will, when they play in 2018, they will be the smallest nation population-wise instead of Trinidad and Tobago. So this is the first World Cup they've missed out on. So qualifying, they're not having any problems with that. They've ultimately lost to Trinidad and Tobago, which is the smallest nation ever to play in the World Cup. So the population stuff, I don't think can be considered as a factor. The distance you have to travel to, essentially it's a continent, isn't it? It's 50 small countries. So maybe attracting the talent in one state versus another state is a big effort, and the expense thing is a factor. You've got to consider as well in America, the thing they're always going to have to combat is it's never, ever going to be the nation's major sport. It's not even going to be in the top two. It's going to be behind basketball, baseball, etc., golf, tennis. Yeah, American football obviously will be number one. It's never going to be there. So they're going to have to combat that. In terms of the question, which is how much of a blow it is, USA are extremely confident of winning the right to host the 2026 World Cup. So the chance to raise that profile this year has gone again. So it's disappointing. I think, the MLS is getting stronger, whether we like it or not. And there's a lot of big players here going over to America at the end of their careers from all over. So that's kind of how the Premier League came back into prominence in the mid-90s, which was players at the end of their careers coming over. So a lot of the youngsters should benefit from that. And I think they'll recover from this setback pretty quickly. But it's a big blow. Yeah, infrastructure, I take that. And that's quite an interesting thing that I'd never thought of. But the population thing for me does not stack up at all.
Okay. Guys, we've come to the end of this week's edition of the Sofa Sports News Football Show, but I've got a bit of World Cup trivia for you guys. So fingers on the buzzers. First one to pop up can have a go. I want to know who were the only nation at the 2010 World Cup to remain unbeaten.
New Zealand.
DeLuca.
Yeah.
Someone's been doing their homework. It was, in fact, New Zealand. Well done. They drew 1-1 with Slovakia, 0-0 with Paraguay, and 1-1 with Italy. I'm sure that's why you knew that, isn't it?
I wasn't sure whether I was meant to make a buzzer noise there or not.
Buzzing noises are acceptable.
If you're interested, in 1978, I think Scotland went unbeaten.
Interesting.
Research that. I might be wrong about the year, but Scotland
will not lose a game at the 2018 World Cup. I can tell you that.
Good point.
Oh God, I must admit, DeLuca, that was incredible. Very quick off the mark. I want to say a huge thank you to tonight's guest, Andy Wilson. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to give us your Twitter handle and tell us a little bit about what you do and where our listeners can find you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Andy Wilson Media. I'm a freelance sports journalist and broadcaster, so featured on the likes of The Express and the Daily Star, and Sunderland, which is it's like a community station in Sunderland. So we run a sports show there every week, Wednesdays from 7 till 9. So sparksunderland.com if you want to catch that. More or less what I do. Brilliant.
Fantastic. Kristan, thank you for joining us. Do you want to give us your Twitter handle and tell our listeners a bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm at KHENEAGE. And at the minute, do a variety of different stuff in terms of covering the US and European football. And also the Front Three podcast, which is where me and some friends discuss what goes on from week to week. So yeah, that's kind of what's keeping me busy at the minute.
Fantastic. I want to thank you both so much for joining us, and hopefully you can join us again sometime.
Thanks very much, Harry.
Would be a pleasure.
Lovely, lovely. Guys, don't forget to head over to sofasportsnews.com. You can also check out our Facebook page, Sofa Sports News, the Football Fan Network. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our partners, the FNX Network, for their continued support. And if you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on iTunes, make sure you hit that subscribe button. From all of us here at Sofa Sports News, goodbye.